Here's how we will be organizing our support. So the BDC will be offering favorable terms for 3-year loans. The loans will be between $2 million up to $50 million.
1/3, that is how much is left of Canada's steel exports compared to before Trump came back to office. Not down by 1/3, down to 1/3. 2/3 of our steel export value just gone. And what just happened this week tells you everything about where this is heading. Because while most people were focused on headlines about trade talks and diplomatic handshakes, Canada's industry minister quietly walked into a manufacturing plant southeast of Ottawa and announced a $1.5 billion emergency relief package. $1.5 billion. And here's what caught me off guard. That's on top of the $5 billion already committed through the Strategic Response Fund. So we're now looking at $6.5 billion in combined federal support for industries that were thriving just 18 months ago. And if you work in manufacturing, if you have a pension tied to industrial output, if your town depends on a steel mill or an aluminum smelter, this is not background noise. This is the story that explains what happens to your paycheck next quarter. So let me walk you through what actually happened, because the real story here is not the bailout. The real story is why the bailout was necessary in the first place, and what it reveals about the cracks forming on both sides of the border. Here's the setup. On April 2nd, 2026, Trump signed a proclamation that fundamentally changed how tariffs on metal products are calculated. Before this, if you exported a product that contained steel, say a piece of industrial equipment, the tariff was applied only to the steel content inside it. Complex? Yes, but manageable. The new rule? The tariff now applies to the full customs value of the entire product. So if you're a Canadian toolmaker shipping a product worth $100,000 that contains $30,000 of steel, you used to pay the tariff on $30,000. Now you pay it on $100,000. That's not an adjustment, and that's a completely different math. This detail got buried in the noise, but it's the key to the whole story, because the tariff rate didn't just stay the same. Products made entirely of steel or aluminum now face a 50% tariff on their full value. Derivative products, things substantially made of these metals, face 25% on their full value. And this took effect April 6th. No grace period, no exemption for goods already in transit. For decades, Canada's trade has been overwhelmingly tied to a single partner. The United States accounts for roughly 75% of all Canadian exports. In the steel sector, that dependency has been even more pronounced. Canadian steel mills were built, expanded, and modernized with American demand as the foundational assumption. When you build an entire industrial ecosystem around one customer, and that customer suddenly imposes a 50% surcharge on your product, the consequences are not gradual. They are immediate and structural. Statistics Canada data confirms that the value of Canadian steel exports has collapsed to roughly 1/3 of pre-tariff levels. The Bank of Canada's own April report states steel exports have fallen by half, with industry consultations pointing to a risk of further declines as existing contracts expire through 2026. This is not a dip. This is a structural fracture in a sector that employs tens of thousands of people across Ontario, Quebec, and beyond. The human cost is already here. In Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, Algoma Steel, one of the country's iconic steel producers, laid off approximately 1,000 workers effective March 23rd. That's roughly 1/3 of its entire workforce. And the ripple effect goes deeper. The city's Economic Development Office estimates that more than 1,600 additional workers in related industries could be affected. We're talking about a potential loss of 2,600 jobs in a single community and over $140 million drained from the local economy. Now, this next part, I had to read it twice. The Canadian Association of Mold Makers reported that some of their members are now receiving tariff bills on single shipments as high as $600,000 on one shipment. That's not a tariff. That's an extinction event for a small manufacturer. I spent 3 hours going through the actual government documents, and what I found is that Ottawa's response is layered, but whether it's enough is the question nobody wants to answer yet. But before I get to what Ottawa is actually doing, and more importantly, whether it can work, you need to understand the strategy behind the numbers, because this isn't just about emergency loans. Something bigger is being built here. So here's where we left off. So $1.5 billion relief package dropping in the middle of an industrial crisis. Let me break down what's actually in it and what it tells us about the thinking inside Ottawa right now. The package has two parts. First, $1 billion in loans through the Business Development Bank of Canada.